Wow. So I'm just getting ready to do a news video and then suddenly it's announced that you can see it right there. The Big Show, Paul Wight, has officially signed with AEW. The Big Show, Paul Wight, is All Elite. This is some breaking news. It's only broken in the last couple of minutes or so. Certainly came pretty much out of nowhere. I mean, who saw this coming? The only interesting thing, I guess, was a little bit of a precursor to this is I saw earlier today, and it was pointed out to me by a couple of people, not many, but it was pointed out earlier today that the Big Show had changed his Twitter name to Paul Wight and essentially removed all of the WWE branding from it. No one thought it was a big deal because that kind of stuff happens all the time. There's lots of WWE superstars that remove the WWE branding from their names. There's lots of people who use their real names on the Twitter accounts. It wasn't a big deal, but wow, certainly came out of nowhere. Didn't see that coming at all. Now we've got a press release from AEW to announce here because he's not going to be joining specifically as an in-ring competitor, although I do think eventually we'll get to that place. So this is what AEW have had to say. They had to say, quote, "As 2021 shapes up to be the year for AEW's biggest shows yet, today the promotion announced that wrestling legend Paul Wight signed a long-term deal, adding yet another universally regarded name to AEW's roster of stars, legends, and upcoming talent. Wight will have an extensive role within AEW on top of his return to the ring, so he will be wrestling. He will serve as a commentator on AEW's newest show, AEW Dark Elevation. Complementing AEW Dark on Tuesdays, AEW Dark Elevation will air on Mondays at 7 p.m. Eastern Time on AEW's YouTube channel and will showcase AEW's established and rising stars as well as the top independent wrestlers within the industry, competing against each other in the ring in pursuit of wins. AEW Dark Elevation will also maintain continuity with AEW Dynamite, AEW Dark, AEW pay-per-view shows and streaming events, with wins and losses factor into each wrestler's ranking in the company. With new wrestling programming now available 3 nights per week, AEW continues to solidify its position as the fastest growing and hottest promotion in professional wrestling." This is what Paul Wight had to say, quote, "It's been amazing to watch what AEW has built in just a couple of years. AEW Dark is an incredible platform to hone the skills of up-and-coming wrestlers, but I also love that established AEW talent can build out their personalities and showcase themselves in new ways on Dark. It's no exaggeration when they say AEW is boundless." This is what Tony Khan had to say, quote, "Paul Wight is one of the most recognizable and impressive professional athletes in the world. He wanted to come to AEW because he believes that we're the best promotion in wrestling, and we believe that he has a lot to offer us, both as a in-ring as a wrestler and outside the ring as a commentator, host, and ambassador for AEW. Paul is one of the most experienced stars in all of wrestling and he's eager to work with our diverse roster. He can benefit and guide our young talent with his mentorship, and his expert commentary on AEW Dark Elevation will educate and entertain our fans and also educate the younger wrestlers on the roster. Furthermore, Paul enters AEW as a licensed wrestler. He's very much looking forward to studying our talent firsthand from the commentary desk in preparation for his return to the ring." So, wow, I mean, there is so much. I mean, talk about coming out of nowhere. I mean, there is so much to look into that one, isn't there? First of all, I'm stunned. I am really, really shocked. The reason I'm shocked is because, look, the Big Show, Paul Wight, regardless of how little he's done on WWE television throughout the last few years, I mean, a feud with Randy Orton last year. His last appearance was the Raw Legends Night earlier on this year. I think he appeared at The Undertaker, Final Farewell in November. He was largely doing bits like that, maybe coming back for the occasional match, maybe coming back for the occasional storyline if it worked, that kind of stuff. But I always felt, and I think everyone kind of always felt, the Big Show would always be a WWE guy. Yes, he started off in WCW, but he's always had that relationship with Vince McMahon. He's this generation and the previous generation's version of Andre the Giant. I mean, he's a literal giant. He is the world's largest athlete. And myself personally, it never even entered my mind that the Big Show would leave WWE and go to AEW because it just felt so out of the realm of possibility because he was a WWE guy. Going back to the early days of even the WWF with Vince McMahon Sr. and Andre the Giant, that mythical, larger-than-life giant figure, Andre the Giant, the Big Show was in the next step of it. They were always managed by the McMahons. They were always managed by the WWF, the WWF, and the WWE. That was always the way, and I always felt like that was always going to be the case with the Big Show. He would always be under the WWE umbrella. Of course, it's past his time to be wrestling over 300 days a year and appearing on TV every single week and being a regular in-ring performer. He knows that. I think the fans know that, and I think the WWE knows that. But the fact that AEW have been able to, frankly, steal the Big Show from under the nose of the WWE, it's a massive play. It really is a massive play by AEW, and it's very significant. I know a lot of people and a lot of fans, when it comes to WWE, whenever the Big Show would show up over the course of the last few years, they might roll their eyes and say, oh, here comes the Big Show again, and all that kind of stuff. And maybe that's justified, but you have to, I think this makes a lot of sense when you dive a bit deeper here, because if you listen to any interviews that the Big Show has done over the course of, gosh, even the last 3 or 4 years, you can tell he doesn't like the current WWE system. He doesn't. There was a period of time where the Big Show was still on the active roster. He was just working live events. And the reason he would just work live events, because he said, look, I don't want to go to TV. Why? Because TV is laborious, it's dull, you have to go through so many creative steps. You have to go through the writers, the producers, the agents, and then Vince McMahon. It's just overcomplicating what is a simple concept in pro wrestling. He didn't like it. The Big Show is an old school pro wrestler. He likes the basics of the business. He likes getting in the ring. He likes working with younger talent, and he doesn't like being scripted or micromanaged or anything like that. It's quite laughable that the world's largest athlete is being micromanaged, to such a small scale like he was in the WWE. So this move, I suppose, in that point of view, isn't as surprising, but it's still incredibly shocking. I don't think really anyone saw it coming. As I mentioned, we did get a couple of people saying, oh, by the way, the Big Show, he's removed all of the references from WWE from his social media accounts. But apart from that, I mean, I really didn't see it coming, but it goes to show that's a big name. That is a big name, pun intended. That's a really big name to steal from WWE, not just because of the history that the Big Show has, Paul Wight has, but also because he is a literal giant. He is a walking, living, breathing giant. He is so recognizable in the world of pro wrestling. Everyone knows who the Big Show is. Even if you're not really a pro wrestling fan, you know who the Big Show Paul Wight is, because he's a giant of a man. He's mythical. He's larger than life. And the fact that the Big Show has decided, look, I've still got some time left that I can compete. I've still got some time left where I feel like I can contribute. And I don't want to be sitting on the sidelines for WWE. I don't want to be sitting and just being tried out on a Raw Legends night. I want to contribute. And I don't want to be part of that system whereby if I have to contribute to WWE, I have to be a producer or an agent. I want to have a free role, and I want to do maybe some commentary. And the Big Show is a very, very articulate guy. He's a very articulate man. He's an actor as well. I mean, the Big Show didn't really work out on Netflix. That was a WWE Studios deal. I don't know if that factors into it. I don't know. You have to remember as well that AEW, whilst they are a privately owned company, they do fall under that TNT TBS umbrella with Bleacher Report and BR Live and that kind of thing. So maybe the Big Show might be looking to leverage that in there as well. We've seen the likes of Shaq, and we'll touch on Shaq in a second, have deals with TNT and Warner Media in general. Maybe it's a case of the Big Show looking at that, saying, look, I can work for AEW, but it opens up my options for working for Warner Media in general. Look at Cody. He's working on ironically, the Go Big Show on TBS. So maybe the Big Show wants to look at that as well. I think, look, as I mentioned, you can probably tell by the way that I'm talking and the look on my face, it's very surprising, very shocking, just because the Big Show was just always, a WWE guy. He was absolutely always a WWE guy. And I know he started off in WCW, but for the amount of tenure he had in WWE, I always felt he would be a WWE guy. And if he wasn't working in pro wrestling, he would work for WWE. And if he wasn't working for WWE, he just wasn't working in pro wrestling. He would go off and be an actor or do whatever, because he's got a variety of other things there. Frankly, as well, it might be a case of him saying, look, as I mentioned before, about having so many days left in the ring, it was emphasized in that press release that we read earlier on that he is going to come to wrestle. Yes, he's going to have more of an all-round role. He's going to be a commentator for the new show AEW Dark Elevation. He's going to be probably a mentor, a producer, a coach backstage, helping the younger talent too. But he's going to wrestle as well. And I think he wants to know that his last few matches are going to be on his terms and are going to be against opponents he wants to face. And I think it's funny as well that the match the Big Show really wanted was against Shaq, wasn't it? It was hyped up and teased all the way back to 2009 when Shaq hosted an episode of Monday Night Raw, and you had that confrontation with Shaq and the Big Show in the middle of the ring when the Big Show was teaming with Chris Jericho, who is now in AEW, and JTD and Shad Gaspard, Crime Time, who were with Shaq. Ever since then, they were talking about eventually one day having a Big Show versus Shaq match. It looked like for a period of time we were going to get that. Of course, Shaq participated in the Andre the Giant Memorial Battle Royal at WrestleMania 32. They had the confrontation, they nearly eliminated each other, all that kind of stuff. And then for a year, for 12 months, we were told as fans, not officially on WWE television or anything like that, but the Big Show and Shaq on social media, it was very widely reported that the plan was to have the Big Show versus Shaq in Orlando at WrestleMania 33. And it never happened for a variety of reasons. Now, Shaq and the Big Show have never really come out and said as to why it didn't happen. I think the Big Show commented on it a couple of times and said, it just didn't come together, terms couldn't be reached, that kind of stuff. I don't know how much the WWE factors into that. You would think, obviously, it factors into it somehow. And given the fact that Shaq is signed with TNT, and given the fact that Shaq is about to step in the ring on the Dynamite before AEW Revolution next week and face off, team up with Jade Cargill and face off against Cody Rhodes and Red Velvet, you would think that maybe that might be the time for the Big Show to make his AEW Dynamite debut, or certainly renew his rivalry with Shaq, and maybe we're going to see more of Shaq in AEW, and we're going to see the Shaq and Big Show match after all, but it's going to take place in an AEW ring. Now, about that, I mean, you can roll your eyes at that, and that's probably justified. I think if Shaq versus the Big Show happened in WWE, fans would roll their eyes, so just because it happens in another company doesn't mean you should roll their eyes as well. But when it comes to Shaq and it comes to Bad Bunny and all of these names, again, I'm not a hypocrite in this scenario. When it comes to celebrities, athletes, famous people, whoever it may be, I never have a problem with them working matches because, again, it makes good business sense, and especially for a company like AEW. AEW's only been around since 2019. If you can get big, well-known names like Shaq having a big matchup against the Big Show, or even when they had Mike Tyson come in, and at one point there was planned to do a Mike Tyson-Chris Jericho match. If you can get those sporting stars, those celebrities, whoever, those big names that have a wide reach outside of pro wrestling, especially for a company like AEW, it's vital because people will always know who WWE is. Even if you're not a fan of pro wrestling, you've never watched an episode of pro wrestling in your life, you know who WWE are because it's woven into the fabric of society at this point. If someone said, do you know what AEW is? They'd be like, what? No, because as pro wrestling fans we do, but the wider public, not even the casual fan outside of that, they won't know who AEW is. But if you hear that Big Show's facing Shaq and they'll say, oh, what, in WWE? They go, no, AEW, it's this different one, it's this competitor. That will get some brand recognition for AEW. So that, again, that is, I guess, is what AEW is leveraging there. On top of everything, look, it's very surprising, isn't it? It's very, very surprising. I don't think anyone ever thought the Big Show would leave WWE and go to a rival pro wrestling company because, frankly, there weren't many options there. I don't think we're ever going to see the Big Show in Impact Wrestling or Ring of Honor, or maybe New Japan wouldn't have been out of the realm of possibility, I suppose. But look, the Big Show's coming back to TNT. It's where he started. He started in WCW on TNT and on TBS. And after, 1999, he came back. So what's that? 10, 20, 22-ish years, he's on his way back. He's on his way back to TNT, and it goes to show, once again, there is this WCW vibe, isn't there, to AEW? I mean, the good parts of WCW, but we're seeing it. Sting, The Giant, and the Big Show, Arn Anderson, Eric Bischoff, Chris Jericho, all of those names that had big influences and big careers in WCW are slowly making their way back to the network. And you know for a fact TNT, when they're hearing this signing, they're loving it. I'm sure that TNT might have helped facilitate this as well. As I mentioned earlier on, they might have said to AEW, look, if you think you can get the Big Show to come back to TNT, maybe we can work out a deal where he can get an opportunity to work on a TNT show or a TBS show, or just somehow work with Warner Media in general, True TV, you name it. There are a plethora of opportunities there for the Big Show, maybe opportunities that he felt that he wasn't getting in WWE. And ultimately, we can talk about Big Show's career outside of the ring, but ultimately, if you ever watch an interview or you ever listen to an interview that the Big Show has ever done for WWE, and they were so good in the last few years because he really didn't care, because he was a legend, he was bulletproof, he knew that Vince McMahon and the McMahon family were desperate to keep him. He loves pro wrestling. He really does love pro wrestling. He is an old-fashioned pro wrestler. He wants it to go back to what it used to be. And you could say, well, he's not going to get that by going to AEW, which is probably true, considering that AEW is not, by any stretch of the imagination, old school pro wrestling. It's the more modern hybrid style of pro wrestling, that kind of stuff. But it's a really big signing. It's a really, really big signing, a surprising signing for AEW. As I mentioned, I really never thought that we would see the Big Show leave WWE, and certainly not compete in another ring that wasn't a WWE ring. So that is going to be really surprising. I'm sure we're going to get some information about it on Dynamite tonight. They've been saying on the official Twitter release as well as the press release, watch AEW Dynamite tonight at 8 p.m. on TNT Eastern Time. I don't know if the Big Show is going to be there in person tonight. As I mentioned, I think maybe a more likely scenario could be that we see a promo, a vignette, something like that when it comes to Paul Wight tonight on AEW Dynamite. And then, of course, next week is the Cody Rhodes, Red Velvet versus Shaq and Jade Cargill mixed tag team match. And to be honest, what a better way and what a better place. There's no better place to debut Paul Wight in AEW than opposite Shaq and getting that Shaq match done. We're not going to see the Shaq's one and only match in AEW because I think considering that Paul Wight comes in, I mean, you'd have to do the match. It's another way to stick it to WWE. You couldn't get this match done. We've got it done like that. So that would certainly be interesting, no doubt about that. It'd be a massive way for the Big Show to arrive in AEW as well. And then look at the roster. Who would the Big Show face in matches? Certainly, again, is interesting. I could see the Big Show reuniting with Chris Jericho. Of course, they were tag team champions in WWE. I don't know how quickly they would go into that, considering that Chris Jericho has been pretty vocal about not wanting to redo stuff he did in WWE and AEW, so I don't know if he would tag with the Big Show or anything like that. Personally, I don't know if myself I really care to see a Big Show Chris Jericho match at this point. There are names though. Big Show Kenny Omega is an interesting one. Big Show versus this version of Jon Moxley, because it's a completely different version of Jon Moxley than Dean Ambrose in WWE, is interesting. Big Show versus Hangman Page. Big Show maybe get involved with people like the Dark Order, the Young Bucks. I mean, there really is some interesting matches there. Big Show versus Darby Allin, I think, would be really interesting as well. There's certainly names there that he hasn't touched before in the past that would be really interesting to see him face off against. So there is a wide pool of talent that he hasn't worked with before, especially in his last few appearances with WWE and his last few days with WWE. He was always about putting over younger talent, and stepping into the commentary role in AEW Dark Elevation is doing just that. I don't know if AEW necessarily needs the AEW Dark Elevation on Monday nights, if I'm going to be brutally honest. We know that they've got Dynamite 2 hours on TNT on Wednesday nights. I still think there's that third hour coming to TNT. We don't know which day and how that's going to work out, but that is coming. You've got AEW Dark on Tuesday. Now you've got AEW Dark Elevation on a Monday. I suppose in terms of the logistics, it's a good thing because, frankly, AEW has so many talents under contract right now. Part of the problem, and I think part of the long-term problem, I've said this before, for AEW would be they've got so many talents under contract that how do you get them all on a 2-hour broadcast on TNT every week? You can't, and that sometimes can stifle the growth of certain talents, considering that AEW isn't a live event business. They're a television, they just do TVs. They don't do live events or anything like that. They might do the occasional tour in the future when things clear up, but we just don't know about that. So in terms of the logistics, I guess you do need another show to feature all of that talent, but AEW Dark, for me, I mean, I watch it occasionally because it becomes quite laborious to watch. I mean, last night in AEW Dark, there was something like, 16 matches? And a lot of those matches are squash matches, and that can be really tough to watch. And maybe that splits that in half. That makes that different. I don't know if I just want to see another version of AEW Dark. I know it's called AEW Dark Elevation. We'll see. We'll see what they can offer. But ultimately, as I mentioned, it's a massive, massive signing in many ways for AEW. It's certainly a signing I didn't see coming. I don't think many people saw coming. The Big Show, Paul Wight, the Giant, is coming back to TNT. He's going to be appearing on TNT in the future. I don't know if he'll be on there tonight, as I mentioned, but it's shocking, and I think it's a blow to WWE. Regardless of at any point in his career, it's a massive blow to WWE because Vince McMahon's always got his giant. Whether it was Andre the Giant or whether it was the Big Show, he's always had his giant, and to take that away from WWE is a big, big deal. So I'm certainly excited to see what's next for the Big Show and for Paul Wight in AEW. It's certainly a massive signing, and it's certainly very interesting. But of course, as always, it's just one man's opinion. What are your thoughts on the Big Show Paul Wight signing with AEW? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. I'll do my best to respond and reply to all of your comments. Really enjoy interacting with you guys, talking about AEW, WWE, Impact Wrestling, New Japan Pro Wrestling, all things pro wrestling here on the channel. So be sure to get involved in the community, drop a comment below. All opinions are welcome. If you have enjoyed this video, please do smash a like on the like button too. Really does help us out here on YouTube. Go up the rankings and get into people's recommendation feeds if they haven't seen our videos previously. But most importantly, if you haven't already, please do subscribe to Wrestling News 365. You can do that by clicking the bottom right hand corner of the screen right now. Or if you wait a few seconds, there'll be a subscribe button at the end of this video along with another video for you to watch. Thank you very much for watching, listening, streaming, or have you come across this video today, and I'll speak to you again very, very soon.
Hey guys, thank you for watching, listening, streaming, or however you come across this video today. Be sure to click on the video on the right there to watch our next video, or click the bottom there to subscribe, or the bottom right hand corner. Thank you very much, and I'll speak to you again very soon.